Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar from Unionlearn. It's going to be about apprenticeships and COVID-19 today. I'm Anna, and shortly I'll be handing over, I'm going to be joined by my colleagues Mark Rowe and Kirsi Keki. Just before we get going, a little bit of housekeeping. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see a chat panel. It's great to see so many of you already introducing yourselves there, telling us your name, where you're from. Please feel free to do that. It's great to see so many of you tuned in. Underneath the screen, you'll see Ask a Question button. Please use that to post any questions for Mark and Kirsi, and we'll get to them after the main bit of the presentation. We will be sending a link to a recording round later today, along with any other resources that might be mentioned. Some of my colleagues, Yusuf and Keith, I think, are in the chat panel ready to answer your questions and post links to any resources that we mentioned, but we will be sending a copy later. So on to today's subject. So like all other workers, apprentices are facing challenges during the COVID-19 outbreak. There are furloughs, for instance, but the learning and endpoint assessments can still continue despite this. So we're going to discuss how unions and union reps can support apprentices to stay at work and to keep learning. So first of all, I'm going to hand over to Mark to kick us off.
Hi everybody, hope you're all having a good day. My name is Mark Rowe from Unionlearn, and I think what we need to start off with is from our point of view, the main thing is that we keep apprenticeships going, really, because as a country, as employers, as unions, we're going to need those apprentices going forward. So that's the main thing from today. But in real terms, we realise that the apprentices have particular issues, but in essence, apprenticeships are under contract, like everyone else. If there's issues around working from home, sick leave, self-isolation, furloughing, etc., then it is trade union business to actually be involved in those issues. But we have to take into account for apprentices, there are some slight differences, and hopefully today what we'll do is we'll try and cover some of those differences and answer your questions. I'm pretty sure we won't get through everyone's questions, pretty sure we won't give everyone the answers, but if you go on the website, we've got bags and bags of information, and we're adding to that information as we speak. So some of the differences that will occur is we have to remember that apprentices are sort of in a learning environment. They're learning new skills, they're learning how to do a new job or a task, and they are programmed to carry out some learning activity during the course of their apprenticeship. So just from our point of view, probably the four key areas that we'll try and cover today as my pencil rolls off my table is there's apprentices who are going to just continue in work, and we'll try and just cover a little bit about that in a minute. There's apprentices who will be on some sort of break, and we'll cover that hopefully today. And there'll be those who are laid off or on furlough, as the Americans say. And then there's redeployment. So we'll try and cover those four issues for you today with a bit of help from Kirsi and Anna. So just as a sort of word of warning to everybody, and I can see like there's loads and loads of people logged on today, just as a sort of little reminder, we are talking England really. For Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, some variations in the rules. So if your organisation or your employer crosses borders in the UK, then just be aware that rules regarding some of the issues we're going to talk about may just change slightly. So just a sort of word of warning really. So for those where it's business as usual, I think it's important to remember that every apprentice has got a contract, every apprentice has got a commitment statement, and hopefully we've all got a training plan. Well, we're hoping they've all got a training plan, we're hoping they've all got a contract, and we're hoping they've all got a commitment statement. And that's down to trade unions as well, making sure that that happens. So in essence, if we can continue that apprenticeship throughout this sort of COVID-19 issue, then we're okay. We can just continue. Probably the issue, if you are continuing in work, would be around the fact that you can't actually go to college, or the assessor or your provider can't come to you because of the situation. So we have to make provision, or there should be provision, to ensure that individuals can actually access their learning. And they might have to do it virtually at home, with a training provider contacting them just like this on Zoom or Skype or whatever platform they care to take. So I think we just need to be aware of that, and we have to cater for it. And I think just in terms of the actual job they're doing, and we know that everyone's going to be under pressure, but if we can keep that learning going, we can get those individuals to the end of their apprenticeship and through to the other side, and that's basically what we want. So if we go over to Anna, she might have another question for us. Am I going quiet now?
Yeah, we do have another question. The next one is for Kirsty, and we want to know a bit more about what happens when apprentices are being put on furlough.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Anna and Mark, and hi everybody. Well, I'm sure we've all heard a lot about furlough, and even if it seemed to be like a new concept when the pandemic started, but as you know, the TUC did some really hard work with campaigning to get the job retention scheme going, and got the government to kind of set up the scheme and pay for towards the scheme. And it's got to be recognized that at the moment, I think that there's sort of like quarter of the workforce is on furlough at the moment. So we're talking about big numbers, and apprentices are part of this group because, as Mark said, apprentices are on employment contracts, so they are staff, regular staff members, so they can be laid off on a furlough scheme like other people. And in some ways, I suppose that the question is that it's a sort of, keeps the apprenticeship going, as Mark said, that like we want people to complete their apprenticeships and achieve. And at some point there was kind of less than helpful messaging coming around saying things as if apprenticeships were somehow different, and as if there was a need to do some sort of different arrangements for them. But the basics is that the apprentices can be furloughed. And I don't want to go to the furlough scheme more than is absolutely necessary. There's lots of information on the TUC website, for example, on that. But the basics is that people are laid off, or staff is laid off. The employer can apply for government funding to cover 80% of the staff salaries and up to £2,500 per month. And obviously, sort of good employers pay the top up, the difference, so that people get their full 100% salary. But going back to that why furlough scheme is important is that because the employment continues, the contract continues, and that means that apprenticeships continue when they're on furlough. And one thing that could be kind of depending on your view, could be seen as an opportunity on apprentices on furlough is that they can continue with their training and learning while furloughed, and the training that they do does count towards the off-the-job training. I mean, this is something that needs to be agreed with the provider and the learning provider, obviously, but I hope you all remember the off-the-job training requirement, which is that 20% of the apprentices' working time should go to the off-the-job training. So basically, while furloughed, you can do your training as an apprentice. And as Mark kind of referred, it can be, I mean, obviously people are not going to the colleges and other outside institutions to do their training. So if the learning can be done at home, online, remotely, then yeah, it can continue. And if we think of the off-the-job training requirement, it can be done in various chunks of time. You know, it can be done in like weeks at a go, or once, you know, like a day a week, or whatever kind of fits the apprenticeship. So at least theoretically, if the provision is there, the apprentice can do quite a lot of their off-the-job training while they're being furloughed. An interesting thing about DFE guidance on apprenticeships is that, well, they're even saying that the employers can start new apprenticeships while staff is on furlough. I'm not sure how that exactly works. Kind of if people are working from home, but you know, why not? If the provision is there and the apprentice, potential apprentice is willing and all that, then it's a potential. The thing about furlough that applies to everybody is that while people are laid off, they can't, I think the quote is, produce services or generate revenue for the employer. And the same rule applies about learning and training for apprentices, that whatever they do in their training, it's not kind of paid work they would be doing. So that's a good thing to remember, that if they're doing projects that, for example, that they are not something that would count as sort of bringing revenue to the employer, for example. And some of you might know that English and maths are some of my favorite topics, so I got to remind you that English and maths obviously are part of that training that can be done while on furlough and doesn't count towards the off-the-job training requirement. I suppose that got to notice that there are some implications on pay for apprentices who are on apprenticeship minimum wage, national minimum wage, or national living wage. I mean, this is the kind of complex thing where you would have to go to the government website and check what's the age relevant minimum wage rate. And on these minimum wage rates, people can be paid 80% of the wages while they are on furlough. But while they are training that's related to their apprenticeship, the employer needs to top up the salary to full 100% of their wage, which is the minimum rate. It's a bit complex, but basically if someone earns more than minimum wages anyway, then they can be paid 80% of the salary while they're doing training. It's not exactly clear, but we're trying to make it sort of a bit more understandable on the website, or get in touch with us and we can kind of hash it out if it makes sense. But this is sort of a condition that is kind of related to those who are on these minimum wage rates. For everyone else, it's sort of like the basic rule that either it's the 80% or topped up by the employer to the 100%. Sorry, go on, Anna.
No, I was just wondering if you wanted to take a question now, you and Mark, or whether you wanted to continue with apprentices on furlough.
I don't think I've got a lot more to say about at this point, except that the breaks in learning, which Mark was going to talk about, kind of related to this. So if you've got a good question, then go ahead.
Okay, yeah. So there is one that is related particularly to apprentices while they're on furlough. So what are the considerations regarding funding under COVID-19, for example, with furlough or any extension to an end date? Do we know about this at the moment? If it's something that hasn't been decided upon, then perhaps we will be able to find out in the future.
Are we talking about, I presume we are talking about the funding that the employer gets towards paying the apprenticeships
I think
training?
So.
Yeah.
I think so.
I mean, basically, if people are doing their regular training for apprenticeships and say they are working from home and the apprenticeship and the employment continues, then it doesn't have implications on the funding if everything goes on normal. There will be exceptions if they are on a break from learning, depending on the length of the break. So, but I suppose that the good one way of looking at it is that if nothing kind of changes, even if the kind of like the environment changes, like we are here at home, then, and if people still go on with their apprenticeships, then yeah, the funding that shouldn't make any difference. It's the kind of like that when things are out of normal, saying with the breaks, for example, when the questions arise, and maybe in some cases that how providers can actually provide the necessary training. But one thing I'm going to say about the off-the-job training in this context is also that it can spread through the whole apprenticeship, you know, like the whole contract. So if it's not done now, it can be done later on. So if it keeps going, it can be the funding kind of follows the system.
Thanks, Kirsi. Yeah, please keep posting your questions, everybody. The other ones we have we'll probably get to in a bit. Just a reminder as well that colleagues are posting links in the chat to further information, both information of what the situation is in Scotland and in Wales, and also some general information about furlough and being and the job retention scheme. There's lots of information on the TUC website, so please do check that out. Okay, the next question is for Mark. Can you tell us a bit, please, Mark, about what the situation is if there is a break in someone's apprenticeship, what the regulations are, what people might expect?
Okay, so I think the first thing to say is just going back a little bit on what Kirsi was saying there about furlough. What we're going to try and do is design some sort of like little roadmap so that you can go on the website and follow the yellow brick road, if you like, from where you are with the apprenticeship issue all the way through to a solution. So hopefully we'll get that live pretty soon. We've been working on that for a little while now. Rules keep changing a little bit, so it is making it a bit more complicated. But just going back to your question there, I think there's probably two things that need to be said. Number one is if there's a break in your apprenticeship and it's 4 weeks or less, it doesn't really affect your apprenticeship. And that was already built into the rules to compensate things like, you know, say you're off sick with a flu or something. You could actually have a couple of weeks off and it wouldn't really affect your apprenticeship. So that was already built into the rules. But if for whatever reason you need to be off for 4 weeks or more, then it does have a bigger impact on your apprenticeship. And that 4 weeks or more rule, that can be triggered by the individual, the employer, or the provider. So it's worth bearing that in mind as I've got a little frog in my throat, so I'm going to have a swig of my tea. So I think the key thing for us to remember is if that time is more than 4 weeks, we have to do something about it. So what we're doing about that is we need to think about extending the length of the apprenticeship to cover the time off. We have to look at the endpoint assessment, and some people will be quite close to an endpoint assessment. Some people will be way down track, but we have to think about being able to move that endpoint assessment to accommodate the time off, because at some point you're going to have to catch up on your apprenticeship, aren't you? You're going to have to do your skills. Now my phone's ringing, I can't believe it. Go away. Kathy Dawson, you're on here live, so don't be phoning me. So in essence, we have to think really hard about that endpoint assessment, and we have to move the goalposts, if you like. So if it's say 8-week layoff, then we add 8 weeks to the end, and we'll have to change. We'll have to look at change a contract, change a training plan, change a commitment statement. All those things will have to be looked at. And again, that's where trade unions come in, and we have to be in a position where we can actually negotiate those things. And those things may be quite tricky in the present situation with everything else that's going on. So it's a matter of us keeping awareness going, speaking to our apprentices, finding out what their issues are, and whether we can deal with them on the spot or whether we need some long-term negotiation on it. So I think that's probably where we're at, without going into detail of every scenario. Does that make sense, Anna?
It does. It does, Mark. Thank you. And that is really helpful. So the next question is for Kirsty. Can you tell us about what the regulations or the guidance is regarding apprentices being redeployed within their organisation, their employer, for other duties?
Okay, so redeployment, as Anna said, is about basically the apprentice being moved to doing a job, another job, or kind of not continuing in an apprenticeship as before. And I suspect this is something that can come kind of relevant, especially in the key sectors where I don't know, say health sector, where there's a need for staff to be on the ground. And basically, if you think about it, that an apprentice moves into doing a full-time job in some capacity, either say that if they are close to their end of their apprenticeship, they could potentially go to do a job where the apprenticeship is preparing them for, or they could be redeployed to do something else in the organization. So, I mean, yeah, it is possible that this can happen, but as Mark referred to earlier, that, you know, like, these things can be union issues as well, that you know, like how the redeployment works. But the kind of like the, for apprenticeship point of view, the question is that, is the learning on a pause? Is there a break? What Mark just talked about, and what happens to the how long is the break, and is the endpoint assessment moved, and if the apprentice is on a fixed term contract, for example, what happens? You know, like you have to take the endpoint assessment while you are employed, so that would mean that then the contract needs to be stretched further, and so on. So these are the kind of questions that come from the redeployment situation, and needs to be discussed with the employer and provider, especially if, I mean, I've seen some guidance advice around saying that if the apprentice is redeployed to doing something else, that then the employer and provider and the apprentice can discuss whether that kind of feeds into the apprentice training. And I think potentially yes, depending on obviously how you know what the redeployment is about. But I think these are all kind of questions that need to be hashed out individually, and might need some union reps assistance, that if they're on the redeployment, how does that impact the off-the-job training requirement, and how does it mean that the break is so long or is it a shorter break when it doesn't impact? And as most of these things that the earlier on these are discussed, the easier it is for everybody. And I suppose that finally on this topic, I just want to say that, like, from the trade union point of view, the obvious thing is that people are paid according to the job they do. So if they are full time in a substantive job, then that's what they need to be paid for, especially if apprentices are on minimum wages, then that redeployment to doing something different takes kind of like a bit different status in a way. And I again, it is a bit of a union business to kind of keep an eye on that people are paid according to what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Really key point there for unions and reps to keep an eye on the pay to make sure people are being paid fairly for what they're being asked to do. So another question for you, Kiersey. Earlier on, you touched on English and maths learning and about how it's a special interest subject for you and about how they should be included in all apprentices or apprenticeships. But has anything changed about how the English and maths learning might take place now because of the times we're all living through?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, yes. A hobby horse of mine, English and maths. I think that anyone who's kind of been following the apprentice guidance and rules in England know that there are requirements for apprentices to do their English and maths, either to have a GCSE or functional skills on level 2, or work towards it if they are on level 2 apprenticeship, or pass the assessment or get the qualification if they are level 3 apprenticeship or higher. That's kind of like short version of it. But yes, there are some there's some lenience in the rules at the moment on English and maths, that for example, that the apprentices that on level 2 apprenticeships who would have been working towards English and maths level 2 assessment don't have to try the assessment now. And those apprentices who've been due to take their endpoint assessment by the 31st of July don't also have to take their English and maths level 2 assessment to pass. And it's kind of, I think the thinking is that they're kind of, like, to concentrate everybody's mind to finishing the apprenticeship rather than the English and maths guidance. But even those who are doing level 2 apprenticeships still have to pass the level 1 English and maths. And the level 3 apprenticeships have to still do the level 2, or unless they already have their GCSEs or functional skills. So, but the provider will be able to tell where each apprentice is with their learning and whether they need further support, and the assessments can be done quite differently. There's lenience there as well, that they can be done remotely, for example, and the tutors and teachers can also calculate the results and things like that. So there are ways to kind of make it happen with English and maths. But I suppose that even if it's not something that you're required to do necessarily, especially on the level 2 apprenticeships, it's always a good thing. We thoroughly encourage everybody to get on with their English and maths.
Absolutely. And yeah, everyone can always benefit from more English and maths learning, I'm sure. Right. The next question is for Mark. Actually, this is a little bit for Mark. Before we move on to questions from the viewers, what more information have you got for us, Mark? And is there anything you want to find out from the viewers, from the people watching?
Thanks for the question. We've already alluded to the fact that we're going to try and do this like little roadmap for you, so that you can, if you've got an issue, that you can follow it through from beginning to end. So hopefully that will come online very shortly. But and we've already put some stuff up on the website. So if you go on Apprenticeships, and then there's a little section called COVID. There's even a banner headline with someone with like a lemon over the face as a mask. So basically, if you click on that, you're straight into our sort of simple advice there. But then we've got a few more details for reps. I think the other things that we've got is we've got an apprenticeship app, which we've been trying to encourage apprentices to use, and it'd be really good if we could get reps to get out there and speak to all the apprenticeships that they have, and just encourage them to use the Apprenticeship Essentials apps, because that will tease out issues, whether it's COVID-19 related or whether it's related to their apprenticeship in general. On there is a little chat room as well, so you can post questions on there, and hopefully we can come back with a definitive answer for you. That's really important. But for those reps who are on, and I noticed there was at least one UCU rep asked, can we put this information out to their apprenticeships? Well, I'm guessing the answer to that is absolutely. But what we want reps to do, and I've been doing a bit of a phone round with some of our ULF colleagues, and hopefully I can see a few names bobbing up. We'd like you just to go out there and find out what's happening to your apprenticeships in your sector or your employer or organisation, and feed back that information to us, because it's really important that we sort of gather information on how it's affecting apprenticeships up and down the country and in different sectors. And we, on the news, we listen to the news, the airline industry is going to go bust overnight. The retail industry is probably doing not too bad, but they've stopped apprenticeships. Hotel and catering, it's like collapsed overnight. So we need to know what's happening to those apprentices, because the government's got this like idea that if you drop out of your apprenticeship 12 weeks from now, hopefully within 12 weeks we can find someone else to go. But if the economy is going to be collapsing like they say it is, then we're going to really have to keep our eye on what's happening to our members who are apprentices. So any feedback you can give me, I'm sure Anna's going to put my email on here, but if you've not got it, it's on the website as well. So just send me some information about what's happening in your little bit of the world.
Thanks, Mark. I won't be posting your email address, but I'm sure one of the other guys will in the chat.
Oh, no.
Absolutely. Yeah, Yusuf or Keith or someone, I'm sure they'll post it in a minute. Right. We're going to have a look at what questions have come in from you guys, from the viewers. So let's take a look at what we've got. So, right. What is your opinion of apprentices being brought back from furlough now, remembering how difficult it is to keep social distancing on the shop floor? I don't know who wants to take that one first.
Go on, Kurt. Are you having a go at Kirsty?
Well, I suppose that the starting point is people's safety. It is obviously the first thing to think about, what sort of risk assessments have been done in the workplace, and what sort of measures the employer has put in place, that like with any employee or staff member at work, that what is the protection. And that obviously applies to apprentices as well, they need to be feeling safe. So with those provisions, yeah, why not? Because obviously it is back to work, which is good on long term, but only if it's safe.
And I think there's another thing, isn't there? It depends on how long that furlough was. I mean, I go on holiday for 2 weeks, come back to work, and I'm thinking my head's still on the beach on Monday morning, So if a furlough lasts quite a long time, I think it's probably something we need to do in terms of easing those people back into work, whether they're apprenticeships or not, really. And we have to start thinking about that. And I don't think we've actually got round to any sort of process or idea on how that would work, but I think it's something we're going to have to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And more broadly than just apprentices returning from furlough, we are planning a webinar in the coming weeks about return to work for everybody, which will of course cover apprentices as well, because it will affect anyone returning to the workplace and the safety measures that need to be put in place. Okay, next question concerns redeployment. So can apprentices be redeployed to other areas of work not related to their apprenticeship? And this might be used by some employers as opposed to furloughing them.
Well, this is an interesting one because, like, it is a bit of a question of obviously the employment contract. It's kind of, you've got to check what you signed, like everybody does the first thing. So, yeah, it does. And it is obviously a union issue as well, and what sort of arrangements there are, like with the employer. And the redeployment, I mean, there's a sort of like shades of that are you kind of, how far are you moving from your actual apprenticeship job role, in a way that, is it in the same kind of area of work, or so I don't think there's a kind of like a one simple answer of yes or no that you can or you can't, but it does happen. And I've heard examples from, for example, in health sector where people have moved to substantial roles because there's a need for staff. But yeah, that has to happen with an agreement and kind of understanding of what happens to the apprenticeship on long term and kind of like completion and all the related issues.
There's probably a couple of things, mate. Kirsty's right. I think the first we heard of this situation was in health service. And you can imagine, where essential workers are, they might have to redeploy people to do other jobs because those jobs are needed more than others. I think our take on it is along the lines of, if it stops your apprenticeship, then you go back to that 4 weeks or longer rule type of thing. But if the provider can, if it substantially doesn't change your sort of skill set, if you like, the provider can have a look at that and work out if you can still continue your learning. Because at the end of the day, I guess whether you're continuing work or whatever, we want everyone to continue that learning process and get through them skill sets that they need to get through their apprenticeship. But hopefully that little roadmap we're talking about, hopefully that will actually deal with that question, because I'm looking at the flow chart over here and I'm in my other desk, and I can see all the little boxes already set up.
Thanks, Mark. So related to that question, someone has asked, what if someone is moved to a job that pays less than what they were on?
In a redeployment. Right. Yeah, I'm not. If this is a redeployment, it kind of is a question that there must be some sort of agreement somewhere between the individual and the employer. That how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I guess don't forget that some apprentices will be on quite a very low wage, and you can't really go lower than whatever minimum apprenticeship wage is. And Kirsty's right. I think it's more about us as trade unionists saying, okay, we've redeployed Mark Rowe on job X, so Mark Rowe should now be getting £8 an hour, £9 an hour, whatever it is, rather than the £3.90 or whatever you were giving him before. So there's a lot of key negotiation to do, really.
Yeah, and it is a kind of like, I think from the kind of union point of view, the starting point is that what is the job role and the pay for that according to what's paid generally in the organization. But I suppose that for the apprentice that I mean the options might be limited in that. Then you're like, yeah, the employer might furlough them. They might say that, well, instead of furlough, do you want to take this other job for the time being? So it is a kind of question of agreeing with all, the provider included, because of, as Mark said, that then the break comes into picture. So it's kind of, there's a bit of complex thinking there, that what is the best route for the apprentice so that they can then continue with their apprenticeships in the end of the day.
Thanks, guys. Another question has been posted asking, many young workers will have experienced trauma as a result of deaths or illness of family and friends. What are employers doing to address the mental health issues, and how can trade unions support them?
That's a good question. What are employers doing? I guess nothing. would be the obvious answer. But no, it is a question that we've asked ourselves internally, and we're just doing a little bit of work on that sort of mental health side of it, because we've obviously already got mental health awareness and other courses for reps, etc. We're just trying to think now whether we need to do something specific for apprentices, because obviously if they've had say a bereavement in the family, then that's a really difficult situation, and you know, nobody really wants to come to work after a bereavement for a little while. But there might be other issues as well, because if you're doing an apprenticeship and you're furloughed, for example, you're going to be worried about your apprenticeship, aren't you? Am I going to be able to get back to doing it? Am I be able to get back to my learning? What's the situation? Will they extend the contract? So all those things we've sort of flagged up in the last half hour or so, they're going to be preying on people's minds. And as reps, we need to go back to those individuals and, number one, support them, check they're all right. Make sure we've got mentoring programs in place so ULRs can be mentors. That's a good place to start and good way to help people, and generally just get an handle on what's happening in your workplace and how you can help those individuals.
And I suppose it's always good to remember that any policies in the workplace that apply to any staff, they apply to apprentices as well, on the basis that they are staff, they are employed. So whatever policies or processes that are set to support staff, say on bereavement, they apply, and especially with young workers, I think it's important that everybody acknowledges that it's a lot at any time, but there's as Mark said, some extra pressure as well. I can see that on the chat that Unison has set up their own support systems for bereavement. So that sounds like an excellent idea from the union point of view.
Absolutely, yeah. It's good to see that example being posted about Unison, and also another viewer has posted a link to accessing mental health support at work for apprentices, I believe. I'm just guessing from the URL there. Okay, another question has been asked saying, oh, sorry, it's just disappeared. What will happen in terms of the unused apprenticeship levy? Can employers carry this over?
So far, there has been no change in that the rule is that you have to, or the employer has to spend it as before. There's been calls, as you can imagine, from employers and also providers to say that, like it needs to be a longer period because of all the difficulties, but so far it's the same, that it has to be used in, was it 24 months since being paid? So no change there.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. There's been no real change. I mean, at the end of the day, providers are drawing down drawing down payments on the basis that they continue learning, even if that learning is sort of virtual. So some employers their levy is still being used up, where others might be suspended a little bit. But there's been nothing from the government to say what had happened.
Thanks, guys. We've had a couple of questions about sectors that are, whether are key workers or, it's a key role, critical outputs. Can you perhaps talk a little bit about those sectors? What can be done to minimise the pause in an apprenticeship, or related to these sectors where there are critical areas? What can be done if someone is paused because of this particular issue, because they are in a key sector, rather than being furloughed or redeployed?
I suppose that like the as with everything and anything, that the earlier the discussions are, the better, to see that, because in a key sector, I mean, we're not only talking about obviously the off-the-job training, which is the 20% of working time requirement, but there's also on-the-job learning that goes on, that apprentices learn while they are at work. So there are opportunities, I think, with joint agreement to kind of pull kind of that, whatever the role is they're doing now, and pull, like take from that and add it to the kind of like the learning. But I totally acknowledge that it can be a kind of like a big question of time, that if you are a key worker, and as we know busy, lots going on, so how it all is fitted in is a big question, learning wise. So I wouldn't take on any more than you can chew, and that's kind of like a bit of a mental health question as well, that the learner, the apprentice, can take a break as well. They can say that, like, this is too much, let's discuss, and I'll be on a break from learning.
Yeah, I mean, that's true, and I guess that one thing individuals will have is a training plan, which they can discuss with their employer or the provider. So there's a chance there to, you might have a little short break, maybe a week or 2 weeks, where you actually don't do any learning because you're an essential worker and you have to do other work. And then so what you can do then is you can go back to your training plan and readjust that and discuss that with your provider and your employer, and say, I need a little break from my skills that I'm learning. My modules aren't fitting in with what I'm doing. Can we just have a rethink on how that's going to work?
Thank you both. We've been asked, can you clarify, please, if an employer is implementing a break or a pause, does the employer have to get apprentices agreement, or is this just best practice?
It's best practice. The employer or the provider can instigate the break, but for the break to be in any shape or form successful, all three of them need to be on the same page for it to happen.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, when I do my little chats to people up and down the country, I was trying to get people to imagine it's like a triangle: the employer, the provider, and the apprentice. So that's the sort of way I look at it. So everyone's linked. So everyone should be talking to one another. Right in the middle should be the trade union guy or girl.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that you've both emphasised throughout is the need for there to be agreement, really, on the triangle. I think we've covered pretty much all the questions that have been posted. Sorry, my screen seems to have gone incredibly dark all of a sudden. It's because of the pouring rain outside. All the light from this room has suddenly disappeared. Before we finish, any last words from both of you? Kirsi?
Just to emphasize that we do want to hear what's happening in the workplaces and how apprentices are getting on, and what sort of, impact this current situation has had, because on long term we do want to see the apprentices to flourish and move on and progress at work.
Yeah. Tell us how you're supporting your apprentices. Get them to use our Apprenticeship Essentials app. Get them to use our chat room, and we can maybe work through any issues that you've got, and we'll try and help you out as best we can.
So all that remains for me to say is thank you very much for joining us, everybody. Please tune in to next week's webinar, which is about study skills, and particularly study skills that you might want to utilise during this lockdown period, focusing on online study skills. Maybe Yusuf can post a link to that he already has, good man, in the chat. So we look forward to seeing you again for a future webinar. Stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye.